Hey, welcome to the Citizen Mike Show. Thanks for tuning in. We do appreciate it. My name is Mike Berdinsky, and sitting on my right is the chairman of the Wallingford Planning and Zoning Commission, Jim Seichter. Jim, welcome back to Citizen Mike Show.
Thank you very much, Mike. Appreciate the opportunity to be back on your program. I think I'll let you know when the show's over with.
Well, in order to get into the WPAA building, I had to promise to be gentle with you, so I'll try to keep to my word best I can. But I want to start out with a review of the data center decision. Remember that? I think it was April 7. The meeting probably took 4 hours. I mean, it was a long one. And at the end of the meeting, the Planning and Zoning Commission unanimously voted against a change in the zoning regs that would have permitted data centers in these designated locations. Unanimous. So you voted no. How come?
Well, let me give you just a brief background on the data centers. I think the town itself, town staff, did or created a good faith effort to come up with a regulation for data centers. Certainly, there was a lot of energy put into it by our town planner, our town engineer, as well as our corporate counsel. We started off the process back in September, and essentially the process ended in April. So that's 7 or 8 months. We had workshops, we had our public hearing on it. So there was a lot of effort put into it. The town, our staff that was charged with coming up with a proposed regulation, even hired a sound engineer to explore all of this. And it was really put upon them to become knowledgeable about data centers, what the issues are, what the problems may be. So I want to point out that essentially over this whole process, there was the industry itself, or representatives from the industry, were absent from this whole process. So it was really, again, left to the staff to do the research. And when it came to the public hearing, answering questions, discussing data centers with the public and with the commission, to be the one that were at the forefront of this whole regulation. And at least I saw, as we went deeper into this, there were more questions that developed, at least in my mind, concerning data centers that really hadn't been answered.
Are you talking about noise? Because that's what concerned the neighbors a lot.
But it's noise. Just how the data centers essentially operate, as far as the generators, the type of equipment, cooling. There's a whole host of issues that I think members of the public had, as well as commission had. And as I said, there wasn't any representatives from GodSpace or from the data center industry there. Except at the last meeting, when there was an attorney he represented, he was just recently hired by GodSpace. It asked that, well, could we extend this for another 60 days, perhaps? Then there was also a gentleman representing GodSpace who indicated that GodSpace was in the throes of recapitalizing, and
meaning refinancing. They ran out of money. They got to dump more cash.
Well, I don't want to.
That's what recapitalization.
That's essentially, yeah. I mean, that's what recapitalization is. But to the extent, I have no idea. But at the end of the day, from my approach, I looked at it. We spent a lot of time on this, and to grind this on for another 60 days, whatever that may be, I just thought it was time to make a decision on it. How other commission members felt, I'm not sure. So given that, it was my decision to vote on it, and at this particular time, given the information that I had, I voted against voted no against the amendment. It doesn't, I think everybody should keep in mind, though, that an applicant, an individual, GodSpace, anyone else, always has the opportunity to come forward with another regulation or proposed regulation for data centers. That's always an open item.
Of course. I want to back up a little bit. One of the features of the regulation was that it set a target on noise, and the target was the data centers shouldn't put into the neighborhoods more than 5 decibels over and above the pre-existing ambient noise level, the crickets and the traffic and that kind of the wind, that kind of thing. And I read after the hearing is April 7, I read in the Hartford Courant, Sunday Hartford Courant, April 10, this. It's a comment from Mike Grella. Mike Grella, Chief Operating Officer at GotSpace Data Partners, said Wallingford's low decibel limit, that's the 5 that I was just talking about, the low decibel limit would rule out a data center, demonstrating that communities don't understand data centers. Let me just comment on that before I go to the quote in the Record Journal from our own town planner. So, GotSpace has been in front of the council, a lot of meetings there. And they were, you guys were dealing with this, as you say, for about 7 months, more or less. And all the while they're in front of the council and while they're in front of you, all the while, someone at GotSpace knew that it wouldn't work. 5 decibels wouldn't work, that this regulation, even if passed, wouldn't bring in GotSpace because 5 decibels was too low. And I was shocked when I read that. And then I understand from reliable sources, but not authorized to expose their identity because they're not qualified or authorized to do so, that the town was aware of this, at least the day of the final hearing and maybe earlier, that GotSpace wouldn't be able to meet a 5 decibel target, and that's why they needed more time to bring in their sound engineer, and maybe they try to get you up to 7 or 8 decibels, something like that. Your comment on my observations, and then I go to the Record Journal reporting.
Well, I guess I probably have a very brief comment.
Yeah.
That's news to me.
Okay.
As far as the comment from the gentleman that you're referring to in the Hartford Courant,
Yeah.
I didn't read that. As far as your other comment, as far as GotSpace making it known to the town or individuals, certainly that's something was not known to me.
Okay.
So again, those.
Yeah.
I certainly have no knowledge of either one of those.
What
items.
about Mike Grella, head of GotSpace, saying 5 is too low? I mean, this makes it sound like this is all an exercise in futility, that even if you passed the reg, they wouldn't have come in. News to you. I mean,
as I said, that's you've just indicated. All right. What you said, as I've indicated, it's complete news to me.
Yeah. All right. So we'll move on to the Record Journal comment. And Devin Leith-Yessian wrote on April 9 his report on that meeting. And he says he interviewed Kevin Pagini, the town planner, and he says, Town Planner Kevin Pagini said the text amendment the Planning and Zoning Commission has been considering since September was written to be protective of residents. But he believes the commissioners made the right decision in rejecting the language. And I read that, and I like to say I fell off my chair. I said, what? All this time that there were these, I guess, hidden qualms, or not hidden, but unspoken objections or something. And I've seen many, many times when the town planner or staff have objections to a project, and they write them up in a memo and they say, this needs to be clarified, this needs to be strengthened, I got a problem with this is vague. I mean, it's a whole litany or a list of problems, but in this case, I didn't see that unless you did. And yet, staff thought you made the right decision in denying. Can you explain that?
No, I can't. I'm not going to attempt to explain someone else's comments. I think that would be would be inappropriate. And I think if you'd like an explanation, you should really ask Mr. Pagini on that.
Would someone have? Do you think it would be proper for someone to have asked staff the general question? A question to our town planner. Mr. Pagini, do you have any problems with the language as written or with the proposal? You ask that all the time. The P&Z asks that all the time, or they could, certainly.
Well, but I think you have to keep in mind that
Yeah.
it was the staff that was the ones that generated the proposed regulation. It was, again, our town planner,
Yeah.
our engineer, as well as our corporate counsel. So I think one would assume that if they're presenting that, they think that they're presenting the best or the most appropriate regulation. That would be my assumption.
Me too.
I mean, that would be my assumption.
Me too. And that's why I was surprised.
Yeah, I wouldn't
Yeah.
expect that someone's
Right.
going to propose something and say, gee, I don't really agree with this.
Yeah.
But
completely
again,
agree.
everyone has their own opinion, and I'd leave it at that.
So my final thought on the data centers, both on the host agreement and on the zoning reg, town staff from the law department, the engineering department, planning and zoning department seem to be backing the deal, seem to be backing the change in the reg to allow GotSpace to come in. And I based it on many nights, many answers, many comments made publicly. They seem to be supporting the deal, and then after the fact, we have the town planner says, you guys are right in denying it, and Mike Grella says, even if you passed it, we wouldn't be in Wallingford anyway. And I say, Citizen Mike, you spent hours on this. Hours.
How much time is that again, Mike?
Hours.
Hours.
You ready to change the subject? Really? You ready to change? We'll change the subject. I want to talk about housing. And I want to talk about affordable housing, market rate housing, accessory apartments, multifamily. I want to talk about all that stuff. And it's been in the news. You don't see it a lot in the local papers just because it hasn't hit the news yet. But across the state, towns are dealing with affordable housing because of a statute passed by the state of Connecticut that says municipalities have to adopt an affordable housing plan this year. And affordable housing across the state is controversial. Some people have a negative notion of what that is. Some people are not bothered by it, but it's extremely controversial. So when this topic is taken up, it often makes the newspapers, and Wallingford's day is coming because you guys got to deal with it. And it was on your agenda, April 11th, to discuss an affordable housing plan and how to adopt it. Yeah, am I okay so far as to progress of what you're doing?
You're right on track, Mike.
Before I get to the definition of affordable housing, because it's a technical term, it's defined by statute, it's not what we could afford. It's what the legislature has drafted, or the government has drafted, a definition of what's affordable. But do you guys, before you adopt this plan, do you talk about it with a public hearing, or how does this work? What do you think? Where's it going to go?
It would go to a public hearing. So you would have a public hearing on the plan, and then after the public hearing, look to act upon the plan.
Okay. So the definition of affordable housing is basically the government assessing the median income, the average median income of a location. I think it's New Haven County in the case of Wallingford. And they say, all right, that's the average median income. And we're going to take, they say, 80% of that and make a computation. And if a renter earns that amount or less, they could be eligible for affordable housing. Am I?
That's correct.
Got it so far?
Got it so far, Mike. You're
In
on a
hard
roll.
numbers, what does that look like to a renter? What numbers are we talking about?
When you say what numbers are...
Well, what income?
On the income level?
Yeah, what income is that?
Well, the 80% of the median income for our region,
Yeah.
for someone who's renting, that would be $60,000. For someone who is looking to, a property owner, would be $68,000. And again, with that, under this whole formula that the state has, they would not be required or would not want to spend more than 30% of that income on housing. So you're using that 30%, which is available, to figure out through a whole formula, one, what a person could afford on a mortgage in order to buy a house, or renter, what a particular renter could pay for rent. And there's a whole formula. They take in the mortgage, they take in insurance, and all of that. And the interesting thing here for Wallingford, if for any town, if you're spending more than 30% of your income on housing, that's not considered affordable for you.
If you're in this income bracket.
If you're in that income bracket, you're considered at a disadvantage. And again, from Wallingford, about 40% of renters fall into that bracket, and about 24% of people who own property fall into that level where they're spending more than that 30%. However, compared to the region, we're a little bit below that. It's about 48% for the region. People that rent are spending more, and about 32% of people that are owning are spending more than that 30%.
So based on the draft affordable housing plan that was distributed to you at your April 11 meeting, I ran some numbers as to what that would mean in a monthly rental income. And I used a income of $60,400, which is 80% of AMI. And my numbers was about $1,500 a month would be the most that someone at that income bracket would pay if they're in an affordable housing unit. Sounds like a lot of money still. I mean, it may say it's affordable, but it still sounds like a lot of money. I don't know. I know there are apartments, getting more than $2,000, and
sure.
So it's something. So if you're a developer and you want to have an affordable housing project, you would have to have units there where the rent, in my example only, is no more than $1,500 a month, when others might be getting $2,000 or more a month for their units.
Sure.
Now, before we go any further, I use the word affordable housing project. That may bring up an image in people's minds of some unattractive building that looks like some project from Baltimore, and all the units are rent controlled or affordable housing controlled, but that's not true, is it?
No, that's not true.
So can these be good-looking projects, developments? I mean,
of course they can. I mean, we have...
Take it away. Tell me why.
Well, we have some already that have been developed in Wallingford. We have several affordable housing projects that we've approved and have been developed. We also have one that's right now under construction. The projects that developments that we approved in the past were home ownership. Where the one that's being developed on Woodhouse Avenue right now, it's 33 units.
How many are affordable in that?
Let me finish, Mike.
Okay.
There's 33 units, and that's a rental project. That's under development. With any affordable project, you have to have 30% of the units classified as affordable.
Okay.
You also, at least in our regulations, because we had, for some of the projects that we developed, specific requirements in the regulations. In some of our regulations, we had that the affordable units could be no less than 80%, could be no less than 80% of the size of the market rate units, and we look to have those to be dispersed within the development, within the project. Because you don't want to have isolation. You want to have conformity, uniformity. Again, you don't want to have a project look, and I think people, if they're looking at affordable housing saying it's a project, I think, in my mind, that's the farthest thing from what it is.
So in Wallingford, you drive by an affordable housing project that may have 33 units in it, you look at it from the road, you'd never know it was an affordable housing project.
I would think that's a very good summation.
Okay. So now I want to get back to the state statute. They set a goal, state set a goal 10% of your housing units, and Wallingford has almost 30,000 housing units, about 29,000 and change. State of Connecticut says, you, Jim Seichter, Wallingford Planning and Zoning Commission, you got to have 10% of your total units as affordable. Well, we're less than half of that, yeah? And you're never, for as long as this earth exists, you're never going to catch up and have 10% of your units affordable. It's not going to happen. I think you agree. I'm not sure of that.
Well, I agree, and well, two reasons why I agree.
Okay.
I think that's or two reasons I'd point out.
Yeah.
One is we're about 1,000, 1,100 units short of that. I think that's a substantial number to make up. The other is that based upon the statute, the units only have to be affordable for 40 years. Now, in Wallingford, we've written into some of our affordable projects, the affordability period is for 50 years. But at the end of the day, if today we were at that 10%, 2 years from now, we could have some of those units roll off if they were affordable and developed 40 years ago, whatever that may be.
Yeah.
So you're going to be dropping units off, so you're always going to be trying to catch up to have that 10% number.
So we're never going to get there. So
I think it'll be a challenge, yes. I can feel confident in my lifetime.
Folks, listen to me, not to the guy on my right. We're never going to get to 10%. But the other question now is more serious, the follow-up. So we don't. So we add 10 units here and 30 units there, and, we feel good about ourselves because we've approved some affordable housing projects. It doesn't put a dent in the goal, and the state eventually will find out about it. So what? What are the consequences?
I have no idea. That's certainly a question I can't answer. You have to ask.
I'll answer it for you.
Somebody at
No,
the state.
I'll answer it for you. What that means is if you're under 10%, if someone comes forward with an affordable housing project in a zone that doesn't allow for residential, it could be in a commercial zone or something else, or there's other technical zoning provisions that might prevent this affordable housing project from coming in, the developer can say, I'm coming in and I'm building my affordable housing project. I don't care what your regulations are on size, density, this, that, and the other, because you're under 10%. I'll go anywhere I want except industrial zones, industrial parks and things like
Sure.
that. Is that a somewhat exaggerated, I'm using that as a rhetorical tool, but basically isn't that the consequence? They can go wherever they want except industrial zones, put in an affordable housing project if you...
But that's, Mike, that's the reality today.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to say. That's the consequence.
Yes, exactly. That's the reality today.
That's the consequence.
Exactly. Because to a very large degree,
Yeah.
From developing affordable housing, the town can have regulations, the town can do a lot, but it's the developers who have to be the ones that are coming up with the projects. I mean, there has to be, there's clearly a demand, but there has to be the interest and the incentive for developers to come forward with an affordable housing project.
So that's the stick that the state has. You don't make your 10% and you're not gonna. So we tell developers, if you have an affordable housing project in Wallingford, put it pretty much anywhere you want. And it could be bigger than you want. It could be, a lot of things you don't like about it. Maybe you wouldn't approve it, but they get to do it because you're not at 10%. I'm not accusing you, just painting the real picture. Okay, so now we're faced with an affordable housing plan by law, an affordable housing statute that says you have 10%. You guys, Planning and Zoning Commission, are going to struggle to come up with ideas on how to get closer to the goal. What's your favorite idea? To get more affordable housing units. What's your favorite idea?
Well, again, to a very large degree, it's based upon density in making it economically viable for a developer instead of developing a project that has, or development that has 50 units at a market rate, to come up with a density where they're going to put in 60 units, 70 units, a certain number of units.
Per acre, that's how
Well, it's, per acre.
Yeah, okay.
But to come up with a number where it makes it viable for them, where if you're having 30% of those units, that if it's a rental, you're going to have to take less than the market, or if it's a development, whether it be a multifamily, single family, what have you, where they're going to have to sell 30% of those units below the market, what they could get on the market, you have to develop some incentives, and it's essentially, the bonus.
So I want to digress for a minute, and I want to read you some titles of some pieces that appeared primarily in the Connecticut Mirror, which is an excellent news source about Connecticut news that deals with this issue. These are the titles. This is an opinion piece. The most effective way to make Connecticut more affordable is housing. I just want to read you a couple sentences. I'm going to go on, and then I'm going to come back to you in a minute. It says, even prior to the pandemic, too many of us were stretching to make ends meet. Housing and childcare continue to be the two largest expenses for Connecticut families. Continuing on, they conclude, this study, there's many out there. This study said 38% of all Connecticut households are struggling to meet their basic needs. I'm going to skip. So what? So what do you do? The opinion piece asks, well, revising zoning regulations to allow as of right and affordable housing near transit, we're going to come back to that, near transit would increase our state's housing diversity and provide new options for all households. We must also ensure that all municipalities contribute to this sort of an effort. So at a public hearing, if anyone, when you eventually have it, wants to come down and comment on your proposed efforts to increase affordable housing, hear this, not Jim Seichter's opinion, it's how I'm going to phrase it. If we want the town of Wallingford to get closer to the 10% goal, if we want to add more affordable housing, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, everyone, you're going to have to tolerate and live with more density, more units per acre on various projects over time. They're not going to spring up overnight. But you can't keep a sort of a low-density town and still struggle and strive to have more affordable housing. It doesn't work. You want more affordable housing, you're going to have more density. And there's two views. Keep affordable housing away, and we like our neighborhoods and our commercial areas the way they are. And the other says, no, we have to make it more affordable, not in the legal sense, but more affordable for families. You're caught in the middle of that.
Okay.
I'm warning you, you're caught in the middle of that. There's
a lot of things I've been caught in the middle of.
Well, I'm just trying to bring some understanding to the issue.
Sure, no, I appreciate that.
That's really that's what we're trying to do here on the show. So one idea was to have affordable housing, small projects, within half a mile of a train station, to be all residential, even though local zoning may say, no, you got to have non-residential on the ground floor. But if this bill passes, within half a mile of the train station, a project could come in, override local decisions and say, we're putting in an all-residential project. What's the matter with that? Why would we have a problem with that?
Well, I think to a large degree it depends, at least my view is it depends upon where that happens to go.
Well, it's going to be within half a mile of a train station.
Well, I understand that. But as far as where a particular project may go, that half a mile radius from a train station is quite wide, and it encompasses a great number of properties. For me, when we talk about our town center especially, right now I think you're aware that as far as having residential on the first floor is something that's not allowed. From my standpoint, at this point in time, I think that that's something that's appropriate. When we look at our incentive housing zone, we have there's 3 zones that make that up on our North Cherry Street zone. Essentially in that area, you can have residential on the entire first floor, second floor, third floor.
Yep.
So that's encouraged. We have other areas in town that are in that zone where in fact it's residential in its entirety. So, do I have an issue with having residential on the first floor? Do I think that's an issue? In certain areas, I don't, but it's not for me to say.
Yeah.
But in our town center, to me, I think it's important that we have retail, commercial establishments on the first floor.
And this is an example of the tension, the disagreement between those that say local control is important. We're going to defeat this bill. It probably will be defeated, I think. We're going to defeat this bill because we like local control. And the others who say local control hasn't worked. Haven't you read the papers? Haven't you been following what's going on? Local control doesn't work if you're interested in housing. And the other side says, I'm not terribly interested in housing, frankly. I'm interested in commercial or something on the ground floor, and I don't really care that much about housing when it comes to practical decisions like approving this bill. And the other people come back, see, I told you so. Local control is never going to work if we want to increase the housing stock. The state is going to have to make some unpopular decisions, and that's the divide. That's the divide.
Well, I think with anything, when you have two competing issues, there's always room for compromise.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what's needed.
Okay. Speaking of compromise, I want to talk to you about multifamily housing, accessory apartments, and I'm away from affordable housing. I'm getting off of that subject and talking about how do we moderate the increase in rents and home prices by increasing the housing stock. Supply and demand, the more houses we have, maybe prices don't go up as high. And so this is not a new idea or my idea, but by increasing the housing stock, you can help moderate the price of housing. Multifamily houses are one way of doing that. Uh-huh. So Wallingford made the newspapers. I'm not saying in a bad way, it just made the newspapers. Again, the Hartford Courant, Sunday, April 10, front page of the Connecticut section, sort of the local section. The headline, what are the barriers to multifamily housing? What are the barriers to multifamily housing? And there was a study that was done, and they studied 12 towns, or they studied a lot of towns. Wallingford made a list of 12. And I think the authors of the study looked at this as a negative. And it says, starts out this way, in at least 12 Connecticut towns, there are major impediments to building multifamily housing that's affordable. And many of these barriers exist in the name of preserving the town's character, a new study says. And the towns that they focused on were East Lyme, Farmington, Guilford, Monroe, New Canaan, North Branford, Old Saybrook, Shelton, Simsbury, Stonington, Weston, and Wallingford. That's us. So I look at the study. Remember, we're coming back to multifamily housing in a minute, and Bruce is going to get ready to tee up some images here. But the study says the vast majority of Wallingford is zoned as residence districts, allowing single-family housing as of right and not allowing multifamily housing except for some narrow exceptions that you can do, like housing authorities is one exception. But it says a few small and scattered areas within Wallingford are zoned separately as multifamily residence districts, which do not allow single-family housing, ensuring the separation of housing types, and zoning permits are subject to site plan approval. Other than this, multifamily housing is only permitted in commercial overlay or special districts with significant restrictions. So the bottom line is Wallingford doesn't have a lot of multifamily housing, or maybe as many as it might. I'll phrase it that way. And again, we have this divide. Good, we don't want multifamily housing. Don't want it. Preserve the character of our neighborhood. And others might say, well, wait a minute. I'd like my young son and his new family to move to Wallingford and find a place where they can live, that they can afford. So you're going to have this divide. Multifamily, Bruce, are you almost ready for this? Multifamily may have a stigma to it, like, oh, they've got to be unattractive. And Citizen Mike, on the Citizen Mike show, it's my show, I can say what I want. Multifamily housing, Bruce, let's put those up, can look pretty sharp. So I just pulled these from the internet. It's all I did. But that's a 2-family house. Hey, that's pretty attractive. 3 garages, 3 driveways, that's a triplex. That would probably enhance any neighborhood that was put in. That's a 3-family. That's a multifamily. Here you go. Sort of a similar 3-family, with their own garage and everything else. It looks pretty nice. The reason why I'm putting these up here, when you guys talk about affordability and whatever you talk about in your coming workshops, if someone has sort of a negative view of multifamily, that is really sharp. And I think there's imaginative developers and architects in town that could put together, if allowed, a bunch of 2 and 3 and maybe even 4-family houses that young families could afford on moderate income. So I just want to get that out. Bruce, you can take that down. I'm going to turn to Jim Seichter and say, you saw those slides. What do you think?
Well, I think they're very, very attractive housing. I also think that, as part of our zoning regulations, we have what's called an open space plan residential development, and under the OSPRD, and from a R6 zone to a RU 120 zone, someone can develop an OSPRD with single-family homes, 2-family homes, or multifamily homes. So there are provisions in the zoning regulations if someone wanted to develop a project similar to that or a development similar to that with those types of homes under the OSPRD regulations, they'd be able to do it. There are, depending upon the zone, there's a certain acreage that's required. So that's certainly something that could be done. When you're looking at those, a home like that, multi-family home.
Yeah.
If you're proposing, well, that should be more of a kind of a fill-in. If I have a single family neighborhood, let me fill in here with a multi-family home. If there's a vacant lot or something similar to that. I'm not sure if that's something. I'm not sure if you would. You'd be in favor of that.
I would, and I've been looking at those. I've been looking at those photos, and I say that would probably enhance the neighborhood actually. But as a what I'm hearing from you, I think, is an argument against loosening the regulations or changing the regulations to allow more multifamily homes in more districts, multifamily homes that could look like what we saw on the screen. I thought I heard from you an argument against that. Don't do it.
Well, I'm not arguing one way or the other. Again, as I always said,
yeah,
I don't make the zoning regulations to a very large degree. People come in and they can propose a regulation. People can propose essentially anything. It's up to them to make the argument that this is something that has a benefit to the town. And I think when anybody proposes a regulation, you have to be open-minded in viewing what's being proposed and what's being discussed.
Well, I was just hoping that the town staff and boards and commissions would be more open so that to the idea of multifamily, so they would take the initiative and put something together, a regulation together, to allow more multifamily, and then hold a public hearing, and you have the group that says, no, not in my neighborhood, and the other group that says, of course, in my neighborhood. I mean, you have that,
Sure.
But that's why you get paid the big bucks. But
$350 a year ain't big bucks, Mike.
That's why you get paid the big bucks. I fed you that line so you could. That's why you get. So again, if we're talking about housing, and we're talking about increasing the housing stock, multifamily is a natural alternative.
Sure.
And so I would just hope that the staff and the Planning and Zoning Commission would take another look at the benefits multifamily would yield to Wallingford residents. Let me change the subject on you.
Sure.
Accessory apartments, because that's what was on your list to discuss, I think, on your agenda. And an accessory apartment, I don't want to, well, I do want to talk about how it's defined in Wallingford, but more importantly, the idea of an accessory dwelling, I don't want to say apartment, I want to use the word an accessory dwelling, which is a smaller dwelling unit, a standalone dwelling unit, kitchen, bath, bedrooms, things like that. Either, I'm going to say attached to the main dwelling, but it's smaller. But it could be big enough so that a young family of 3 or 4 could live there. It's not just the way I'm talking about it, not just an in-law apartment, but it could be that. It could be mom and dad or grandpa and grandpa. It could be that. But I'm imagining now, as I got into preparing for the Citizen Lake Show, this episode, a larger unit that the homeowner could rent out if he wanted to get that income, if he wanted to spend the money to build, because they're expensive, if he felt it was worthwhile to build an accessory dwelling unit, rent it out, increases the housing stock, that's good. It could be an in-law apartment, that's good. The zoning regs as they exist allow for accessory apartments as of right. What I'm suggesting is encourage more of that by allowing more flexibility, increasing the potential size to 30% of the main dwelling, or 1,000 square feet, whichever is more. Maybe it would work, maybe it wouldn't work. And I hear the divide, but I'm going to go to you in just a minute and say, Jim, what do you think? And I know what your answer is going to be. The divide is not in my neighborhood, and the other divide is, of course, in my neighborhood. I want mom and dad to live with me when they get old. Your thoughts?
Well, again, let me think about this one.
Gotcha.
No, essentially, my thoughts are, I think accessory apartments are certainly a benefit. I think we've seen in the town, I think the overwhelming majority of accessory apartments that come before us are for what people call, in-law apartments, family members, mothers and fathers, what have you. People are looking to have their family closer, so they're building an accessory apartment. Right now, the maximum is 780 square feet. Can't be any more than in 2 bedrooms. Again, if someone comes forward and say, gee, I think that maybe 1,000 feet might be more accommodating. Well, again, that's something to look at.
To be discussed.
Yeah, to be discussed. That's something to look at. From what we've seen, I think there's very few, if any, people who've come before looking for an accessory apartment or looking for it because they want the additional income.
Yeah.
And there may be people out there, in fact, who have a single-family home, and in a way to make that more affordable to them initially is to have, a portion of it rented out.
Here's my case on that point.
Yeah.
On that point. So they build an accessory dwelling unit for mom and dad. And mom and dad live there happily next to the family and their grandkids for 10 years. But now there comes a time when mom and dad are no longer there. Either they're in a nursing home, they've passed, they're no longer there. That homeowner might want to say, Mary, we could rent this out. And it's 1,000 square feet. We could rent it to a nice family of 3. And we could help, defray the mortgage. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't have to work anymore. We could just have a 1-income family, because that little dwelling unit is a profit center. So that kind of fits into it, I think. So there's one more topic I want to get to, but I want to sum up where we are. You and I have solved the housing problems of Connecticut. I don't know if you know that, but we've tackled affordable housing with more density. I'm not asking you to agree, but, we kind of just play along, be a good sport. We've increased the housing stock by liberalizing the rules on multifamily. and we're increasing the housing stock by making accessory apartments maybe more attractive. This is kind of an experiment. We don't know, but it might work. And you put all that together and you do it in 2022. Wonderful achievement. Agree?
Oh, it's a wonderful achievement. And I assume I'll also be on the presidential ballot in 2022 if I do all of this.
All right, let me change the subject on you. I want to go to downtown development. The gift that keeps on giving. We've talked about this on the Citizen Mike Show maybe 5 to 10 times, the various guests. But picture this for a minute. And when I talk about downtown development, I'm only talking about lower downtown, Hall, Quinnipiac, Route 5, the old train station, Lower Center, and the Route 5 corridor. That's the only thing I'm talking about now in this conversation. And picture, if you would, a developer that comes to you and says, I have a plan to have spiffy, new, market rate units, meaning the people that are going to rent have got some cash. They're making pretty good livings. They're professionals usually. I mean, they're making some dough because I'm going to charge them about $2,200 a month. So they got some dough to spend. And I want to put a new building there that'll house 50 dwelling units on an acre of land, which I've managed to assemble. It took a lot of work to do it, but I've managed to assemble it. And the divide appears now. The downtown rehabilitationists, say, this is the dream project. Are you kidding me? This is the dream project. But there's another group that says, we don't want them, send them away. Which group are you in?
Well, I certainly wouldn't be in the group that says we don't want them, send them away.
Okay, because you denied an application that was not exactly like that, but I'm taking my example, sort of ripped from the headlines.
Sure.
Based on a true story. Not exactly true, but based on a true story.
Yeah, but we didn't say we didn't want them, send them away. I think we said what you're referring to is I think we said perhaps this density is too high and it needs to be looked at and compare that because the project that you're referring to or the theoretical project happens to be in the incentive housing zone.
Well, he wanted a text change, and he said that if he didn't get it, then his options on the properties that he needed to assemble, he was going to have to walk away from that. You denied unanimously, not just you, unanimously, this is not a good idea. And so even though the development proposal was not quite as ambitious as what I described, it was nearly that. I mean, it's not a bad example that I gave you. So the town had an opportunity to have a new building, market rate, putting not a lot more people than would have been allowed under existing zoning, a few more people downtown. I hear from the town center types, we need more boots on the ground, more feet on the ground, more people living down there. Plan of Conservation and Development says that. We want to increase density, the opportunity comes, but it's not exactly the right project. And I'm trying to figure out where did it go wrong? What are the objections and how do we fix it? Because, one last thing, then you have the stage. If that guy said, hey, I'm proposing 50, but now I'm going to propose 60, and it's an affordable housing project, you're stuck, aren't you?
Not necessarily.
Oh.
No. Again, I think
we're going to have to come back to this in another show, because you're stuck. You're stuck. But go ahead, wiggle out of that.
Well, I'm not trying to wiggle out of it.
Go ahead. Yeah.
But again, I think with this whole project, Mike, that what we're trying to do is encourage affordable housing in this particular area. That's what we're looking to do. And it all comes down to, from my perspective at least, and I can't speak for other commission members, that what is the appropriate density first for an affordable project? And once you decide on an appropriate density for an affordable project, at least in my small mind, I believe you work back to what's a market rate number for density. And that's where I think you have to focus on. And, in this particular case, as I said, we're planning to have a workshop in May to discuss this. And we encourage the gentleman who proposed this to come to that workshop and to present, some ideas so we can work toward a number that works for him. I understand his option, at least he indicated, he represented his option on the property expired. Doesn't mean that there may or may not be an opportunity for him to make another offer at another price on the property, because certainly what controls development is construction cost, but also land cost. And certainly, an individual who owns property, they have the right to ask whatever amount they want for a particular property. That's their option. In some ways, though, I think you have to look at it and say, what's the real economic value of the property based upon what someone can develop on the property? So, I'm encouraged that, with this particular property, that there may something that may come about.
Yeah, I'm going to support your point in a small way by saying this. It could be, I don't think this is the case, this is a hypothetical, but it could be the owners of the properties that he wants to buy, the owners are in the audience watching you deny his application. And they say, oh my gosh, Jim Seichter and 4 others said no to the guy who wants to buy my property. I've just lost the buyer. My dream, my retirement. I was going to live in Florida, an expensive condo and have my boat. I just lost the buyer. And how do you save that buyer? You go to the buyer and say, Jim Seichter and the boys just voted the proposal down. I guess I have to drop my price. Is that what you're hoping for?
That may occur.
I'm trying to help you here.
No, I'm not.
Here's another perspective. I guess if you deny enough of these, the property values are going to go down, but how many people are going to come coming to you? So, Jim, let me give you another perspective. And this is the perspective of the resident driving down Route 5 into that area, approaching from the south the old train station. And it's pretty ugly. You have a horrible-looking cemetery wall. There's wires all over the place. Buildings that are underdeveloped. It's pretty ugly. And then you say to this resident, who, by the way, has paid their taxes on time for 40 years. Okay, they have a voice too. Oh, anyway. And so they drive down, and someone says, see that spot over there, which is part of the ugliness? There could be a brand new spiffy building with 50 dwelling units in it. Those residents have got some cash. They would add vitality to that area. Do you care whether or not that building has affordable units in it or not? And that driver would say, I don't really care. I'd rather have a brand new building. But I understand we're not going to have a brand new building because there's other issues or something. So I just want to bring that perspective that there was a chance, and there could still be chances for similar projects, but because of an affordable housing goal, which we're never going to meet, those projects may not come. Your thoughts on my comment?
Well, I don't think you can take the approach where let's just give up on affordable housing.
Oh, I'm not.
Well,
I don't think that's the place for affordable housing necessarily, but.
Well, see, I guess we could disagree on that.
Yeah, or I wouldn't sacrifice a market rate project because we have a goal of affordable housing. I wouldn't sacrifice that, I guess, is my more considered view.
And I'm not necessarily sure if you're correct that, in fact, it's been sacrificed.
Okay.
I think you have to look to see how this may or may not play out. So I think you may be a little bit over your skis by saying it's been sacrificed. It may be. It may not be.
Okay. Last comment, and I want to try to limit our conversation to like 3 or 4 minutes. It has been conventional thinking in Wallingford for many years that in that area you must have commercial activity, commercial occupancy on the ground floor. And that thinking was born and became encoded in our regs before the days of the internet sales, before the days of Amazon, even before the days when the big box stores came into their prime. And the idea then was, if you put more feet on the street by having people come to these commercial areas and shop and trade, it'll benefit something. I mean, it's good, or that's a plus. And now I wonder if that thinking needs to be revisited, because if there's a market rate project that potentially has 50 units per acre, you're going to put more feet on the street than some other shops that are down there. And what does it matter anyway if a couple of properties don't have commercial on the ground floor, they have residential, because that would help the density, the over-density problem that some see. Use that ground floor as residential, the building doesn't have to be as high or as massive. But it's that thinking, let's revisit the requirement that commercial has to be on the ground floor. What do you think?
Well, I think in that particular area, at least in my mind, I still look at the fact that I think it's for the type of a downtown that you want. I think it's more, I won't say appropriate, but I think it's more beneficial to maintain that character, to be having, whether it's commercial. If you look down what we have right now, I think there's retail, but it's not overly retail. There's, you have your nail salons, your hair salons, you have your restaurants, you have a laundromat. There's a whole host of businesses that are there right now. I think one of the things that we perhaps should look at is maybe be a little bit more inclusive as far as what could be allowed on the first floor, as far as dental offices, medical offices, something in that nature. So instead of saying, let's go and put residential on the first floor, perhaps let's look at it and be a little bit more inclusive as far as what types of businesses or commercial businesses can be allowed on the first floor, because there's some that are not allowed on the first floor. If they're on the first floor, they have to be in the back portion of the building. So I guess that would be my first look at that, rather than having simply residential there. But again, I'm simply one voice of
Understood.
of five.
So let's make that the final word, except for this. We've now solved all the problems of the world with respect to housing and development of the downtown. Everything has been solved and taken care of. With respect to the downtown, we'll take another look again at that requirement of commercial on the ground floor. We're going to take a look at that. We have multifamily, affordable, all of it's been solved, all in one episode of the Citizen Mike Show.
There you go.
Let's call it quits. I want to thank Jim Seichter for being a super good sport. He gets points for coming on the show and engaging here with some heavy issues. And those points translate into another invitation to another episode of the Citizen Mike Show. I want to thank WPAA for hosting us tonight on this episode of the Citizen Mike Show, and thank you viewers for tuning in. See you next time around. Good night, everybody.